Hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening. The presentation today will be given by Matthew Gribble. He's at the University of California, San Francisco, and he's Associated Chief for Research in Occupational, Environmental, Climate Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. Matthew conducted his PhD in epidemiology from Johns Hopkins University, and the postdoctoral studies were in statistics at the University of California, San Francisco, or Southern California, that's right, Southern California. Okay, now he's leading the environmental health program and supporting development environmental health research at the University of South California, San Francisco. I am always making a mixture with the S, right?
Yeah. University of California, San Francisco.
University of California, San Francisco. Thank you very much, Matthew. I'm sorry. Hello to my friends at that university as well. He's motivated especially with tribal partnerships and issues on oceans and human health, the climate change, equity and sustainability. Some keywords that we have been listening the week before the Ocean Decade meeting in Barcelona. So Matthew, thank you very much for being here. I think that the topics that Matthew is working now overlap with many of the interests of the Marine Sciences Institute. So from here, maybe we can get future collaborations. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you all so much for coming on a Monday and for having me here at ICM. It's a pleasure. So today I'm going to be talking about one of our recent projects, which is one of the first studies of human health co-benefits of marine protected areas. And this is not the only studying this topic, so I'm going to begin by contextualizing with some of the other work that people have been doing in this area. But this is a very new area of research, and it's one that I think that ICM and your neighbors across the street at IS Global over at PRBB could be like a really good team for evaluating these things in Europe, around the Mediterranean, and in other sites. This fish is the state fish of California, where I live in California. This is the Garibaldi fish, and we have beautiful kelp forests that are designated as marine protected areas along the California coast. Marine protected areas exist worldwide and are of increasing recognition for their potential benefits for fisheries and for the marine ecosystems, but I think that there's also a really important economic benefit to countries from the human health benefits potentially of these marine protected areas. So marine protected areas, or MPAs, we define as geographically defined managed areas to promote conservation. In some of these MPAs, that means no fishing is allowed or other activities are restricted. In some MPAs, the management restrictions are less. It varies across places what this means. Marine protected areas are intended to grow to 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. That's the 30 by 30 goal. And this is aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 14, Life Underwater, as well as other SDGs. So like Sustainable Development Goal 3, Human Health and Well-Being, I think is very much related to the expansion of marine protected areas. And the health co-benefits of marine protected areas could arise because of several different pathways. Some of these might be because of the impacts on the ecosystem that manage the fisheries, and then the nutritional benefits for people from a healthier fishery. So like you have more healthy fish and larger, more stable populations, you may have a more sustainable blue seafood supply. But you may also have other benefits from a healthy ocean, for example, tourism or psychological benefits of the pride of living near a beautiful place with a healthy ocean. So there may be several different mechanisms, especially when you get into broader health outcomes like mortality. There was a systematic review done in 2020 by A.R. Rashid that identified only 5 studies of health outcomes in specific communities, and they didn't really have a lot of quantitative information. It was a lot of surveys of people's feelings about how things have changed. And so these are the 5 studies that this literature review found. One was looking at Australian volunteers who are volunteering for marine protected areas. So it's a very special population of people who care about the ocean. The second study was in Kenya, and it was looking at fishery stakeholders. So a different interest in marine areas, but it's also like a specific population tied to the health of an MPA. Similarly, we have in Western Hawaii additional stakeholders. There was another study on Kenyan MPA stakeholders, so 2 studies from Kenya. And then the last was marine protected area stakeholders in the Philippines. So the 5 studies identified in this literature review about possible benefits were focused on specific populations in only a few places that have direct ties to the MPAs. The study designs for these were surveys or interviews. They were not using vital statistics or other public health records data. It was more conversations with the people who are interacting with these MPAs. So it's limited evidence. Another systematic review, which was conducted using a different protocol by Baum et al., found more studies that were focused on health outcomes, but they noted it was usually just a sentence in the intro or discussion, not the primary focus of the research. And so for various health outcomes, they had different physical, mental, emotional, food security, or connection to nature, place identity kinds of benefits at least mentioned in these papers, but the mention was often, they said, very cursory. One study that just came out last year in Nature Sustainability did what I consider a landmark evaluation, one of the first major quantitative studies of human health co-benefits. And this was regional, focused in Central America, Honduras, and Guatemala. They looked at fish data coming from the regional monitoring effort called the Healthy Reefs Initiative. They looked at health data from the demographic and health surveys, and they identified places that were nearer to different kinds of marine protected areas or further from those areas. They measured the fish biomass in the marine protected areas, thinking that maybe the healthy fisheries are part of how there might be a health benefit. And they looked at the health outcome of stunting, which is during development, if you have a nutritional deficit, you might have a much smaller height as an adult. It's this endpoint or health outcome called stunting, and income near the marine protected areas. And so you can see that across the gradient of unrestricted or lightly restricted or highly protected, you have differences in the fish biomass of the community, as well as for commercially important species. And you have lower stunting significantly with being near a marine protected area. And this could be if it was a general use zone, which is like a light management, or a more intensive, a highly protected area. There were, in addition to benefits for stunting, lower probability of stunting, they also had potentially higher income for the communities that had high protection, so like a no fishing zone, et cetera. So our study, which was published around the same time as that other study focused on Honduras and Guatemala, we were looking across countries at marine protected area expansion and the country level age standardized adult mortality for humans. And this is the reference if you want to go back to this paper for more detail than today. Our study used data from the UN Statistics Division on the percent of territorial waters that were designated as MPAs. These data were originally collected by the UN Environment Program, UNEP, and submitted by national statistics bureaus. We also got data from a public database managed by Columbia University called the Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, CDAC, about the percent of the population living within 100 kilometers of the coastline. From this, we could identify countries where a lot of the people are living on the coast. It's a coastal predominant country for the population. And then we also got mortality data for adult male and females, GDP growth, and electricity from the World Bank, their World Bank Development Indicators database. And we also, from the World Bank, a different database, got what they call voice and accountability estimates, which are a measure of liberalization of democracies and governance structures and development, the social dimensions thereof. And so if you look within a single year, each of these panels is a year. So we have data from 1990, data from 2000, and data from 2014. Both for women and for men, the female mortality and the male mortality have a negative correlation between the mortality on the y-axis and the percent of territorial water. So as countries have, across countries within the same year, more marine protection, they tend to have a lower adult mortality. And this is true across years. But a question that's maybe a more policy interest is what happens when a country changes its percent territorial water. So if they expand their marine protection area, so that you're not just comparing wealthier versus poorer countries, you're also comparing the policy more directly. We had, for this analysis, we restricted it to countries that had more than half of their population living near the coast. We coded the percent territorial waters as 5% increments, so like 0 to 1 would be from 0% to 5% or from 10% to 15% change in territorial waters. Do we want to do questions along the way, or do we want to wait for questions at the end?
Usually we wait for later, but how do you prefer? We can wait until the end, no? Maybe? Yes.
Okay, well, we'll do questions at the end. So our first model was just a simple model without predictors other than controlling for the clustering of observations across years within country. The second model we controlled for the past percent territorial waters. And so if you have the current level of territorial waters protected as MPAs, controlling for the past, that's a way of saying that the current one is recent MPAs or change in MPAs compared to the past. Model 3, we controlled for time trends in mortality by adjusting for calendar year. Model 4, we adjusted for development indicators like contemporaneous GDP growth and electricity. And then our final model adjusted also for governance indicators, this voice and accountability estimate. And our results were very similar across these models, with the results being a little bit weaker with confounder adjustment than the unadjusted model, because some of these changes in mortality across countries might be because of time trends or governance or things. But in our final model, we still see a substantial reduction in the mortality as countries are increasing their marine protected areas. So there's about a 2% lower mortality per year as countries have 5% more marine protected area extent than they used to have in the past. And this association of a 2% drop in mortality may not sound like a lot, but that's actually a lot of deaths that might be prevented through marine protected area expansion. The economic implication of this could be huge, and I think that this merits further study than this first study just doing this crude comparison of mortality rates. This evidence has already been influential. So there's a high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy chaired by Norway, but it includes several other countries as well. And they commissioned a blue paper titled, "How Can a Healthy Ocean Improve Human Health and Enhance the Well-Being on a Rapidly Changing Planet?" This report was released during the UN Ocean Decade Conference 2 weeks ago. And our study was one of the key pieces of evidence cited in this, pointing to how there may be important health benefits for the public from a healthy ocean. And so if we increase marine protected areas and countries' mortality rates go down, that suggests that there may be an important health co-benefit. So there are a lot of additional things that can be done now that we've done this initial exploratory study. The first would be to assemble more waves of data, to contact environmental ministries to understand what their marine protected area coverage was in different years. So we used the 3 waves of data that were available from the UN Statistics Division, but there were years in between 1990, 2000, and 2014. So if we can have more years filled in, we can have more data and be more confident about our conclusions than just looking at about 10 years apart. We can distinguish between MPA subtypes, so highly protected areas versus weakly protected areas. Our current analysis used the UN database that only had total MPA and didn't distinguish between the management of the MPAs, the highly protected versus weakly protected areas. We'd like to look at other health outcomes than just mortality rates. It's a very coarse health outcome. You might see stronger associations if you look at things that are more specific, and that might also give you some more indication about the mechanisms that are at play, if this is a psychological benefit or a nutritional benefit or some other benefit of being near a well-managed MPA. We would also like to look at how these benefits are playing out, so not only by looking at specific health outcomes, but also by controlling for or considering potential mediating variables like the income differences near fisheries or from tourism, the nutritional benefits of diet measured in the population, and see how these things change along the path from marine protection to ultimate health outcomes. And then if these relationships that we're describing are causal and not just because of some other confounding variable, then estimating the economic benefits of these lives saved could potentially be really important for policymakers deciding what investment in protection would be sensible for their countries. If there's a huge economic benefit to this, in addition to saving the fish, then we think that this might be of interest to decision makers. And I deliberately kept this talk short so we could have time for a good conversation. This is my email address, matt.gribble@ucsf.edu. If you would like to discuss either more questions about this or potential collaboration, I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards. But there's a lot of time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. I think this is one of the topics that may be more different in this audience, that we are used to work with data from the environment. Here we see the link with human health and with economy. So I think this is one of the challenges that we have as, I would say, as naturalists, if we can put this adjective to the research we conduct here. And then this is one of the main gaps we may have, how to make this bridge between the natural studies about the marine protected areas, about fisheries, etc., and then make this bridge with human health and economy. No? And then my question is, how did you manage to facilitate this bridge? Do you work with people directly at Johns Hopkins, for instance? Well, you mentioned the economy data, the world economy. So, but was it easy to get the contacts that you need? How did you do it?
Yeah, so all of these data sets were publicly available free data. That was part of what we thought was really important for this, was transparency, using open data so people can easily verify our results. And we could do this for free. This was a project led by a student who did a rotation in my research group. She ended up having to work on this much longer than just the one term because she was excited and I didn't let her quit. So this project took a few years to reach final publication, but initially this was developed as a training exercise for a student of here's how you can find databases online and merge the data and do some statistical analysis. It ended up having policy implications that I think are really interesting from the findings. And that student now works at the World Bank. So we were using World Bank data, and she is now employed by them. I can't take credit for that. She's also accomplished for other reasons too, but I don't think it hurt that she was using their data. So we, for doing this research, had a multinational, multidisciplinary team. This included a social scientist who studies kind of the social impacts of fisheries from Australia, and a health economist, environmental economist who's now in Denmark, and our mutual colleague Laura Fleming, who does oceans and human health from the UK, and then my student and I from the US were the team for this, and then also my research assistant, who's another student, was also helping. So this team was able to talk about some of the different dimensions of it. I note we don't have a marine policy expert or an oceanographer on our team. This was just an initial exploration, and I think as we do more intensive research on this topic and follow-up research, we really do want to have perspectives like marine biologists who can talk to us about what are some of the different types of management, what are some of the different types of other benefits, or distinguishing between like nutritionally important species or commercially important species that would be exported. Like, is this a subsistence reef fish that people are eating in the area, or is this like a fish species that they sell and they can buy grocery store food? Or is this a species that people like to go on snorkeling tours and look at? I think that this local environmental knowledge would really enhance future work. So we didn't have that as much as I would like. I think that that's something we would really like to include going forward.
So it's an open field
Yeah,
of study and research and international collaborations.
yeah, and it's new. Like I was shocked, honestly, when we started looking into how much has been done in this area, how little has been done yet, because marine protected areas, Sustainable Development Goal 14 are so important, but the public health community hasn't really been working on this topic, and the oceanographic community hasn't really been thinking about the health co-benefits, and I think that this is just a natural thing that we should work on together.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Sally.
Thanks for the talk. Really, they are doing a study that is needed to give another message to the society. No, the sea is protecting us. We are not protecting the sea. The sea is protecting us, no? Which we receive benefits from that. And I think that it's not many work about this is because it's not easy. Well, my question is related with this because for me, the difficulty in the data or that we may collect and so, is to identify causal relationships, no? Cause-effect relationships, because there is a lot of variables that are working together. So probably where there is more protected areas, there is also more sanity thing, more investment in health or in other others. No? When you arrive to the protected areas, you already have invested in health and other things. And how you plan to try to identify cause-effect relationships with all these?
Yeah, so that was something we did to a limited degree in this study, and I think would be really good to do more of with more data, is control for some of these other things. Like, we know that countries that can invest more in marine protected areas may have better sanitation, may have other investments in public health, and so you might have this correlation with lower mortality, but it's not caused by the MPAs. It's just MPAs are a signal of a better functioning country. And so to control for that in this study, we did things like controlling for percent of the country with electricity access, what type of governance it had, like voice and accountability estimates. But we were limited by the data set size for the number of variables we could control for statistically. If we had data from more years than just 3 years of data, like if we had every year, we could control for more variables because there'd be a larger data set. But ultimately, these kinds of comparisons are going to be a correlation observational study, and they won't fully be conclusive by themselves. I think you'll need to corroborate these kinds of investigations with other research using other methods. So like the study that they did in Honduras and Guatemala, where they were looking at like individual people's health and how the individual people's health differed rather than the country level aggregate statistics, I think is a complementary data stream we need. And I think that this is just a starting point. But I think having more data so we can control for more variables and more flexibly, like with splines instead of a linear term, et cetera, I think would strengthen the rigor of this. But we didn't want to have conclusions beyond what the data could support. So if you start making very fancy models and you don't have a lot of data, then if your assumptions in the models aren't so good, then it can be a problem. So we wanted to be conservative in our conclusions for this first study and then do more work in the future.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you believe in the idea of the blue zones? You know that there are very few research and mostly it's epidemiological, but only 2 publications. So do you think the blue zones can be related to marine protected areas in general, or?
Can you define blue zones for, there are many people who don't know this term.
Okay. Blue zones, in fact, it was a term by a National Geographic explorer in some places all around the world where there was water and where the people could live longer with better healthy outcomes, better quality of life. And for example, there are places like in Japan areas or Sardinia, many places in the Mediterranean, and it was linked because of the seafood and the relaxing conditions, which sometimes is not the case of the marine protected areas like Cap de Creus in Catalonia, where you have overcrowding and it's not relaxing any longer. But do you think it's possible to make this link? Because I always was interested in that area, but I have seen just 2 publications or nothing else.
It's very difficult to draw comparative studies between locations because so many other things can be different between them. And this, I think, was the previous question as well. How do you know that it's MPAs? If you make comparisons within a place across time as well as across places, it's a little easier to say. But for distinctive hotspots of good health and longevity, it's hard to know why these places are special and people live longer because there may be multiple things that are different. I think that there is good evidence for several health benefits of being in a blue space that could contribute to longer lives and healthier lives. So cognitively, people have found associations with affect, so being less depressed, restorativeness and stress level. So if you're happier and more calm, it might have benefits for blood pressure and therefore stroke. It might have benefits for depression and then suicide. So there are some things that might lead to mortality statistics being different from being in a blue space. You might also have the nutritional benefits of having more fish protein in your diet versus other types of protein. Fish have a lot of beneficial nutrients in them like omega-3 fatty acids and selenium and other things that might be valuable for longevity as well. And that's offset potentially by some contaminants like mercury. But if you're in a low pollution area with high nutrient content of the fish and you are happy to be outside because it's beautiful and you're getting more physical exercise, there's also research on people's exercise happening more often in proximity of blue. They call this the blue gym effect. All of those things I think could contribute to better health in certain areas that are coastal. However, I think it's really difficult to establish that as a fact because there are many other things that might be special about these places besides the fact that they're coastal. Also, a lot of the world's population lives on a coast. And like you were noting, there are places that it's very stressful to be on, even though you're on the coast. So like Bangladesh is overwhelmingly a coastal population, but it's an incredibly densely packed population. So you have, in addition to vulnerability to coastal storms and flooding and inundation, you also have just a high population density, and traffic and crowds related to that can be a source of stress as well. So I think it's a nuanced story. I think that in areas that are perceived as having a beautiful environment and less stressful and good food, people will do well. But it's hard to know if that's a blue zone effect.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your talk. I just was wondering about if you find any unexpected relations in your comparisons, or let's say some not unexpected but negative relations.
So we didn't find that there were harms of marine protected areas. People had speculated in other work that you might have a loss of income from fishing, which might be offset by tourism sector getting better, but potentially a loss of income could have health harms, has been argued for why some places don't want to pursue a marine protected area plan where there's fisheries that are restricted from fishing access, as maybe is locally harmful for the fishers. That evidence, I think, is very context specific, and if fishers are accessing spillover fish stock that are doing better because of that, then you maybe just have a more sustained source of income than a fishery that is collapsing. My boss, when I started this project, didn't believe that this was real, and so she was surprised that there was an effect of any size, because she thought that there would be zero and that I was wasting our time. So to that extent, I think that this was a surprise for some of the public health people I've talked to about this. But I suggested doing this project because I did think there might be a relationship, and the relationship that we observed is consistent with the idea that went into motivating this. But there are so many weaknesses of this study because we only have 3 years of data. We only could control for so many variables. There's only so many countries that exist that have populations with the data available, with most of the population by the coast. For all of these reasons, we can't be super firm in the conclusions from this initial study, but I think it opens the door for further, more detailed research.
Any other question? No? No? Well, before closing the session, I also want you to introduce Mark To. He's a student, a PhD student at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and he's interested in this topic, and maybe you can introduce yourself, because it can be also another way of collaborations.
Thank you so much, Professor Elisa, and I'm humbled and honored to meet you people, all of you, and to also join Matt in the discussion. So thank you for the presentation. I'm also interested in working on blue economy, and being in Barcelona as one of the blue economy hubs has been interesting for me. So I was not expecting to talk, so so thank you so much for having me, and hope to engage with you soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. He's also, he also met Laura Fleming. So we have a nexus with Laura that she's also listening and watching us through YouTube today. So also a hello, a warm hug to Laura that is online today now as well. So if there are not other questions, thank you very much for attending the presentation of Matt. Thank you for being here, and see you later.
Thank
Okay.
you all very much for having me. It's been a lovely time in Barcelona. And if anybody wants to talk to me one-on-one without like a microphone, I'll be here for a few more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.